Welcome to Across Africa, our weekly look at stories and big issues from across the continent. I'm Georja Calvin-Smith, and this week my special guest is South African Deputy President Paul Mashatile. Deputy President, thanks so much for making time to come and speak to us at Across Africa.
Thank you very much, Georgia, for inviting me.
So you're actually in Paris for the very first meeting that's really geared at drumming up investment between France and South Africa specifically. Do you think that the opportunities there are greater than before because of some of the fractures that we've seen between Washington and Europe and geopolitical shifts in terms of alliances that have just been going at breakneck speed recently?
So what we have done, we've brought South African businesses. They are now meeting with their counterparts here because we want to increase trade between South Africa and France. I mean, we have had a good relationship with France for years now, but we want to expand. And if you want to say why now, in fact, we have been planning it for the last 6 months. But it's so opportune now because, you know, the geopolitical situation is changing. And we've decided, you know, let's not have our eggs in one basket. Let's diversify. Let's look at other markets. We have a good relationship with the United States, doing a lot of businesses there, but we realize that it's time as South Africa and as Africa to engage countries in Europe, in Southeast Asia, and so on. So for us, it's an opportune moment, and we have been well received here.
So how has South Africa's economy actually been hit by some of the Trump tariffs, some of the shifts in its commitment to things like the G20, the African Development Bank? How is your country doing in light of some of the funding and support that has been withdrawn by changes in Washington?
Our biggest worry really is the tariffs. A 30% tariff will be too hard for our automotive sector. That is exporting a lot to the United States. One of the things that also is worrying us is the cut on funding for HIV/AIDS program, the PEPFAR funding. We are looking now at increasing our own local productions. We were getting about 17% of our support from the US on our HIV/AIDS program, and we are trying to be self-reliant now, but we'll also engage other markets where we can get affordable drugs and so on. So yes, we will get affected if tariffs are raised to that level, the cut in funding on our health programs, but we are looking at surviving on our own together with other African countries. We've been talking to them and say, let's do something for ourselves as the African continent.
Some of the deterioration of that relationship between Washington and Pretoria has in part been, it's that whole question of the Afrikaners being received as refugees. Now, there has been widespread acknowledgement that there is a mischaracterization of the relationship between Pretoria and its Afrikaner Afrikaner population. But just for clarity's sake, set out why this description of there being a white genocide or that Afrikaners' land is being taken from them is not accurate.
There's no genocide in South Africa. Of course, there has been a situation in some farms where farm workers themselves were killed, including some farmers, but it has affected both black and white for years. That's why we came up with a rural safety strategy. But there is no genocide at all. And when the president signed the expropriation bill into law, they made a lot of noise that we're going to take their farms, there is going to be land grabs and farmers are being killed. There's nothing like that. We're working very well with farmers in South Africa. You know, South Africa is a democracy, so if some people feel they want to go and live in the United States, they are free to do so, but they must not lie about why they are living, and let them live and go and stay in the United States as they want to be refugees. Really, it's their business. But they can't badmouth the country.
Young black men are unfortunately the biggest victims of violence in South Africa. With all of the work that you're doing in terms of repairing, bilateral relations with Washington, improving relations with France, what is happening domestically in terms of tackling the soaring rates of crime?
Our biggest focus is to ensure that these young people are employed. As you know, there is a very high level unemployment rate in South Africa, especially affecting young people. So we have agreed as a government that let's prioritize growing the economy so we can create jobs. But there are other plans as well that we put in place, like fighting crime and corruption and so on. But a growing economy is critical for us, because once people have jobs, we're going to be able to remove them from the streets. These young people will become productive, they'll become focused. We will still have to deal with crime, of course, but when the economy is growing, it's easy to move people out of crime situations. So that's why I'm traveling, that's why I'm in France, engaging companies to come invest in South Africa in the field of energy, in infrastructure, tourism, and so on. So we are hard at work. And the economy of South Africa is actually growing, albeit slowly. I mean, we're looking at maybe 3% over the next 2-3 years. We are at 1.9% now, but we're pushing very hard.
South Africa has an influence on economies beyond its own. So the G20 presidency, it's in your hands. The US has boycotted that. How does that affect your plans to push African priorities during your presidency of the bloc?
In fact, we decided that we should do exactly that. Now that is our term to lead the G20 presidency, we're going to focus on Africa.
But how?
We're bringing African countries on board. In fact, some of the meetings are taking place in African countries. The ministers in Africa are participating. We invite them as observers to participate, but we have consciously decided let it benefit Africa, not just South Africa. We will also use the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as a way of mobilizing the participation of African countries, and they are quite happy with that. So when you look at the G20 this year in November in South Africa, you must see it as an event for Africa, not just South Africa.
How are your regional relations? So there was a lot of friction between Pretoria and Kigali over the M23 invasion and those South African troops that were killed as part of the peacekeeping force that's now been pulled out.
Yeah.
Things got very heated between Rwanda and your nation. What are your plans to repair that relationship?
Our troops are coming back home. So that situation is being resolved. You'll remember that there were arguments about whether Rwanda or Rwandan forces are supporting M23, and President Kagame was saying, no, there is no such. So our approach now is that it's okay now, it's being resolved. Let's continue to work together as African leaders to ensure that there is permanent peace in the continent. And I was encouraged by the fact that in the recent AU meeting, President Kagame was sitting next to President Ramaphosa, and they were really chatting nicely like brothers.
Does South Africa accept Rwanda's rebuttal of its support of M23 when there's so much evidence of the contrary being true? Is that an issue that the countries are at disagreement over at all?
Well, we really didn't want to go to war about, who's correct, who's wrong. President Kagame said he is not supporting M23. Other people were saying, well, we've seen evidence of that. But our biggest question is that let's just resolve this problem. That's why we have decided, okay, we will pull out our troops, the troops from Malawi and Tanzania, all pulling out to allow them in that region to consolidate peace with M23. So we're quite happy that we are moving in a direction where I think there will be peaceful resolution of the situation. We have a lot of other issues now to focus on domestically at home. But we will continue to support peace initiative in the continent. That's really us. As South Africa, we were taught by President Nelson Mandela that we can't sit and watch when other people are suffering, when there's violence, there's war in other countries. We need to be on the side of peace. We need to support. So we'll continue to play that role.
I can't not ask it after you have stated your position on peace so clearly. Any regrets about confronting Israel, particularly in light of the friction it may have caused between Pretoria and Washington, who's a close ally of Israel? Any regrets of having taken that genocide case against Israel?
No regrets at all. As I said earlier, that we will not sit by and watch when women and children are being killed, innocent people. Historically, President Mandela said to us, our relationship with the people of Palestine is very important. In fact, he said we cannot regard ourselves as free people when the people of Palestine are not free. We come from a country of apartheid, where people were maimed and killed. So this is within us. It's in our blood not to watch people being killed. So it's a principled stand we took that this should not be allowed. So we stand by that.
Thank you so much for your time, Deputy South African President Paul Mashatile. That's all we have time for across Africa. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.